All right, hello everyone. My name is Matthew. I'm the founder of a company called Wild, building virtual reality software. So I recently saw this tweet by Martin Casado, A16Z Scout. Obviously, and pretty much anything that is related to VR, especially by the mainstream tech collective, I tend to see. So he was showing off some gaussian, whatever, splats running on the Quest 3. Obviously, this overlaps with AI, so it's probably why it sort of piqued the interest of an otherwise, I think, outside of VR person. Here we can check that. A16Z. Let's see what he's invested in. Okay, yeah, so he's invested in, I mean, the one that jumps out to me is World Labs. It's a Gaussian splat world model company. No VR investments, it looks like. Let's see. Photo Labs? Yeah, not related. Yeah, so no ideograms. That's a ideogram, I believe, is a Mid-Journey competitor. So sort of in the realm, because you can generate, especially in this example, you can generate Gaussian scenes from AI images. This one here is generated, it looks like, from a AI generated image. So he says, runs at about 30 FPS, right? That obviously will improve over time. Metaverse is coming, right? So, I think, to varying degrees, people have used the term metaverse over time to describe VR, or, as the hype was dying down, it stopped being just VR, it became Fortnite and Roblox and all these things. So I quote tweeted this and I said, "This is the consensus of what VR needs, and it is totally wrong." Some replies that I agree with. Some people saying, like, "Why do I have to meet people in VR? I like that it's a holodeck experience machine." And then other people asking for more expanded thoughts. So I decided to do that. I wrote a Substack piece on my company's Substack titled VR Gaussian Splats, Virtually Irrelevant. VR will be even better than the Holodeck. And the reason why I bring up the term Holodeck is because other people like Robert Scoble tend to use the term Holodeck along with Gaussian splats pretty frequently. It was recently sort of officially confirmed that Gaussian splats are being used on the Apple Vision Pro personas, and most of the mainstream tech people who still remember VR, for a lot of them, the first thought of VR is the Apple Vision Pro and the personas, and how lifelike can avatars get, all that stuff. And basically, what this article is saying is, first of all, right, these neural rendering techniques are cool. They're really good. They're extremely realistic, right? It is stunning. Admittedly, how when you go from a traditionally rendered scene in VR to a neurally rendered scene in VR, the difference is night and day, right? In one, it definitely looks like a video game, especially on standalone headsets, right? It looks like something from PlayStation 3 or even earlier. And then when you're inside of a neurally rendered scene, Gaussian splat or Nerf, whatever, it feels like you're looking through the world through the headsets, through an iPhone camera, right? It looks much more like the pass-through on Vision Pro or Quest than an immersive, polygon game engine rendered scene. And that's really cool, right? It's it's understandable why the people who don't have a lot of investment, both literally and figuratively, in VR are really excited by this and think that it's cool. But this concept of the holodeck, and I am the first one to admit, right, that the holodeck is a cool thing, right? It's I'm a very big Star Trek fan, watched all of the holodeck episodes, especially on repeat. I love the holodeck, right? I think it's cool. but it is so far off from what VR is best for. And specific, just to like sort of confine the argument a little bit, as I do in this Substack piece, the way that the holodeck is being presented is sort of the maximal utilization of AI and neural rendering and these things. You can put on a headset, or maybe even you don't have to put on a headset, but you can speak a world into existence that in the future might not just look extremely compelling, but have real-time generated sound, have interactivity. They might be, they might just continuously generate so that you can just keep on walking or keep on talking to hallucinated inhabitants of this world. And the thought is that just like how video models have gotten more and more consistent over time, these neurally rendered worlds will be like an interactive video model that's 3D and that you can explore, which is effectively like, bar haptics and feedback and whatnot, is effectively what the Star Trek holodeck is. And I can understand why from a tech perspective and from like a AI maximalist perspective, that's very cool. But for people who have actually spent time building in VR, they're aware that this is very much not what makes VR great, and what especially will lead to VR becoming a massively socially contagious virus of sorts that just sort of head crabs itself onto people's faces and keeps them there, which is what I want to happen. So you should read the article. I'm obviously spent more time writing it than I'm spending time, constructing sentence after sentence here. But effectively, right, my perspective on what makes VR great is, first and foremost, and this one isn't unique, is social interaction as the cornerstone of any experience in virtual reality is 100% required for some level of plausibility for that world, right? If you want a virtual world or a story or something else to have a deep sense of meaning and realism, yes, graphics are great, right? But they're not always required. Books don't have graphics, right? Video games haven't always had great graphics. So what tends to be really important in the successful virtual reality experiences that have taken off is this grounding in social interaction that's 100% plausible because it's just two people talking, right? And when a world is grounded on that cornerstone, people don't have to go through the suspension of disbelief that they might have to do if they're going into a extremely specific narrative single player game or narrative multiplayer game. And so that cornerstone of like social presence and social interaction has already been tried, and it's already succeeded far beyond other sorts of VR software. The best example of this, as I discussed in the article, is Gorilla Tag. Right, Gorilla Tag is a social lobby that you are immediately placed into. Right, there's no loading. There's no like lobby selector. You open the app, you're automatically inside of this social playground. It has this game of tag that you can choose to participate in, but more often than not, kids are ignoring that tag game in favor of just social interaction. And because the game doesn't try and do too much, it doesn't try and put up these gameplay guardrails or narrative guardrails, everything that happens in Gorilla Tag is just as real as any other physical playground, right? It's kids playing around, making friends, making enemies, bullies, all this stuff. And that is like the single reason why it has succeeded so much, is because these kids don't need to suspend disbelief to participate. It's just a social town square. But of course, right, if that's all that was required for VR to take off, we would all be in VR chat. We would all be having conversations in VR when we want to talk to people. But that isn't happening. And it isn't happening because this sort of minimum bar social interaction and social grounding is not enough. It's not enough specifically to compete with the physical world and all the great things that we can do in real life, physical life. So effectively, what touch on is the 5 essentials that I have for a plausible virtual reality world, specifically one that I think can take off and reach massive social contagion of VR. First one, a single social shared world for all users. This means no server instances. Everybody is in the same world. If you're in one spot in that world, you're in the only spot of that world that looks that way and is that way. And everybody is, whether they're great distances apart or whatever, everybody is in the same continuous, non-fungible world. Second one, right, and this is specific, on point number 1, that is in contrast to Gorilla Tag and just about every other VR game that, when they reach 15 players per lobby, they duplicate the lobby and make an identical version with different people. And that is, I'll get into why that's bad, but it's not how it should be. Second point, continuous manual travel. No loading screens or teleportation. I'll also get into why this is a critical piece for plausible virtual reality worlds, but that this is in contrast to, again, if you're in an instance of a current virtual reality game and you want to go somewhere else, you either typically have to place down a portal and you see a brief loading screen and then you're somewhere else magically, or you have to walk through a dedicated tunnel or a dedicated pathway and you are transported more seamlessly to another space. Third one, rationally maximize individual user freedom of expression and creation. This I'm not going to talk about as much in this video. I talk about it a bit in the article, but this sort of hits back at why social interaction is such a good cornerstone for a plausible world. Why is human to human social interaction more plausible than human to an AI NPC at its best, right? Well, it's better because the people are talking to one another just as they would in the physical world. And while AI NPCs might get good and might be just as plausible eventually, grounding not only social interaction, but also the stuff that populates these virtual worlds is equally as important. So you can think of like free user creation in a virtual world, right, where players are free to build and destroy and whatnot to a rational maximum, as the equivalent to users being able to talk freely, right? The conversations that are being had are more significant because it is by the players and for the players, just like the things that are being built are by the players and for the players. Only they know the conversations and the things that they want in the world. Number 4, persistent uninterrupted world state and history. This basically just means that this massive free single libertarian single server doesn't get reset, right? So there's sort of there's an increasing value, an exponentially increasing value every day that the server remains online, and that becomes something that is extremely hard to replicate and is inherently valuable. That is opposed to like a Rust server that resets on some cycle. Number 5, content is driven primarily by users' creations and participation. Again, this is kind of like a repetition of the previous points about social interaction and creation. If there's some constructed narrative that is driving activity, it's going to be seen more as a game than a place, right? Which is ultimately what VR should be. So, after this, I sort of go into each of the points, which I think you should read. But I think one of the points of contention that people will have here, and this is something that I've heard, is that they don't understand, why, specifically on, I guess a little bit on the single shared social world, but the thing I'm going to focus on mostly is continuous manual travel, right? That is arduous. That's like extremely laborious, right? It requires, it is in distinct opposition to the internet that we're used to, where you can click on a hyperlink and go to a very distant part of the internet instantly. It's also very distinct from the typical the state of the art for VR worlds, where if you want to go somewhere else, right, you can open up a menu, or you can go to a terminal, you can click teleport, and you're suddenly in a different world. And again, right, the first question you should ask is, well, if this like teleportation standard for traversing virtual worlds was so good, then why hasn't VR chat taken off more? Why hasn't VR in general taken off more? It's very hard to argue at this point that immersion, visual immersion and social interaction alone are the only things that need to drive virtual reality as a value proposition. Now, the reason for no loading screen, well, no loading screens is obvious, but the reason for continuous manual travel, meaning walking from point A to point B, manually and in a time-consuming manner in some cases, the reason for that is the experience. And ultimately, right, that is what VR is about. It is not about utility, in a broad way. It's not about, easing workflows or making social interactions more efficient, right? It's about creating a better experience. And it made me think. I didn't really know how to fit this into the article, but it made me think about James Cameron's conversation about the movie Avatar, when studio executives were wondering why there were so many long flying sequences, and his response was that, it is, first of all, it was like roots the audience in the world, which is true both for movies and for VR, right? And I'll touch on that again. But also, he allows the basis for this experience factor to be amorphous and abstract, and I think that's okay, right? Too much of startup culture these days is about trying to nail a one-liner. It's about trying to nail a clear value proposition. If you do this, it will increase your efficiency 10x. Right? This is literally the advertisements for a lot of like YC startup companies, and that's fine for some companies. But for something like VR, right, there's no reason why it should be applied in that way. Again, it's entertainment, it's an experience. So we don't need to constrain ourselves to that way of thinking. The fact is that the experience of walking from one point of virtual space to another is better than teleporting there. If you try it, it'll feel better. It allows emergence to happen. It allows unexpected things to happen in such a dense and socially driven world. And it is deeply rooted also in human biology, right? Humans not only have this amazing sense of interpersonal presence and intimate presence, where if I'm standing in front of someone, whether in virtual reality or physical reality, I pick up on their microfacial expressions. This is talked about a lot in VR discourse, of course, because there's a lot of talk about avatars, right? The fidelity of Vision Pro avatars or whatever, right? Humans have this amazing sense of social presence, right? Because we adapted that way to form trusting relationships over millions of years. And while that is an important factor for building VR software, it is far from the only factor. Another factor, another mental advantage or mental evolution that humans have is an amazing sense of space, right? This can be inside of a building, but it can also be on a large scale, like a city scale. There's a reason why once you've lived in a city long enough, you develop a mental model for the city. So suddenly you don't need to look at your map when you're walking around street corners. Right, I'm sitting right here in Soma in San Francisco. I know that right in front of me, if I go far enough, I'm going to hit the marina. I know that if I go backwards, I'm going to hit Palo Alto. I know that if I go in that direction, the YC office is over there. I know that Salesforce Tower is in that direction. I know that that the Presidio is over there, and that's because of the way that human brains have evolved. And just like social presence and good avatars to some degree are an important thing to get as close to one-to-one as possible inside of virtual reality. That is too. And teleporting between two different places in VR headsets does not respect that. It does not tap into that in the same way that we focus so much on avatars. It doesn't allow the spaces that we're visiting inside of VR to form a coherent mental model of the space that we're traversing. So now I will go to this is a map that we're working on for factions, right? When we have been experimenting with factions, we think about what are these human, what are these factors of the human brain that we can tap into and very discreetly engineer to our advantage to create a positive experience, a positive social world experience, without doing rigid game rules, without like restricting where people can go, or without sort of blanketly disallowing certain activities. Again, we want to maximize user freedom. And one of the things that we can do, because of this great sense of presence, and because factions is a continuously traversable world, is we can change the geography. Right? We can use the geography of the world that we're allowing people to visit to shape how they behave. So what we tend to see whenever we wipe the map, which we do when we're trying a new experiment, what we tend to see is we see players, because they have the freedom, they tend to set up towns in certain places. They tend to go off very far away through forests and settle towns or cities or bases or whatever. They tend to go elsewhere and build, arenas or courts for sports that they invent, again, because they have the freedom to do so. And after these places get established, and after people are talking about them enough, and after the memetics start to set in, you would think that people would be confused as to where they want to go. You'd think that, oh, well, somebody needs to get to this town, we need to teleport them there. But that's not what has to happen. What happens is players have this geospatial model that they've developed of the world because they're walking all around it, that you'll see one player say, oh, just walk over that hill and through the forest and you'll find this town that somebody made. And that's like immensely rich in immersion. It's so much more rich than, a marginal improvement in graphics, because it taps into that like that grounding, like, spatial presence that humans have. And this applies to, like, cities too, right? Right now on the Quest, if you, technically you can invite your friend over to your Horizon home, right? You can have their avatar come visit your home environment on the Quest. And you have to ask yourself, why are people not using this? Why do people not give a fuck about their Meta Horizon home environment? They might say they do, but they don't really, right? There's nobody clamoring for, insane customization or like whatever, right? Nobody's really doing that. Nobody's even inviting their friends to their home spaces. They're just getting on calls. And the reason why they're not is because, again, it doesn't tap into that sense of spatial presence, right? My home is just this, like, void, or like just this like not like unbounded concept that has no relative position to my friend's home. There's no grouping. There's no like grounding, genuine, non-fungible thing that is like rooting my home as mine. There's no way for me to like conceptually understand my home versus another person's home. It's just like a total idea space disaster. But what you can do when you have a continuous, modifiable, ubiquitously shared world is that you can build buildings, right? And that means, for example, right, this is the spawn area that we're going to have in the next update for factions. We've got the entry hall. This is where people join for the first time. This is a bank/trading hall. This is a courthouse because we don't ban players. We allow a judicial process to do that. And this is a governing hall with a Congress inside where we make decisions. And the fact that they can be laid out like this deeply roots them as concepts and places rather than just like void space where they can be freely interchangeable with one another. There's no reason, if there's no distinction, if there's no spatial and visual distinction between each of these buildings, and they aren't relatively positioned to one another, there's no reason to have a court case in the courthouse versus, in the bank, right? And I'd even go as far as say that those activities like court rulings or bank transactions would not happen unless there was this visual and spatial distinction between the environments and that they were grouped together in this area. So, right, this is obvious, but it's impossible for a town to form if each of the buildings is not spatially positioned next to each other. And when everybody is in a continuous world that is spatially relative, then towns actually mean something, right? Social graphs, right, in social media are immensely important, and the equivalent is a town inside of VR, and that only means something if there's spatial relation between all of the inhabitants and all the buildings in that town, and then that town versus another city or whatever. And if that's not possible, if these things not only can't be grouped on a small scale in a town and a large scale versus multiple towns and multiple cities or nations, then the meaning is just completely lost. And this all sounds very like, schizo or whatever, but if you actually experience it, it feels extremely visceral and sort of hard to explain the utility of. But I guess the utility also kind of makes sense when you think about maximizing user freedom. If you want to maximize user freedom, then you need and you also want a continuous world, then you need some way of allowing people who don't like each other to not interact. And what better way to do that than just put distance between them? And that's what they do, right? For example, there was a faction in our game that was recreating Nazi Germany or something, right? And that's obviously a lot of people don't like that. So what happened? Well, they could do two things because it was a spatially relative world. Because of maximized individual freedom, they could collectively act. The people who disagree with this faction could collectively act against them. What happens? Nazi Germany faction gets destroyed, right? And people who don't like them go elsewhere to settle their own town so they don't have to interact with others. So, I don't know. This is all to say that the current status quo for VR worlds is just completely wrong, and worse, that Gaussian splats are just way misaligned with what this needs, right? This requires extremely consistent and persistent worlds. It requires bespoke and defined creation abilities, and it also requires a performative runtime. But that'll be fixed by for Gaussians later on. So the conclusion that I sort of make at the end of this is the advancement of these new rendering technologies has no impact and no bearing on the actual demands for a plausible virtual reality world. So the result is that if you wanted to make the metaverse or something with neural rendering, it would look exactly the same as these 5 principles, these 5 maxims, but it might just look prettier. So I'll put a wrap on that. I encourage you to read this article and follow me on Twitter because I have lots of, tangent opinions from time to time. And maybe I'll do more videos like this, just rambling and talking and crap. So yeah, and of course, if you want to try something that takes these 5 principles into account, Factions is live today. You'll join, you'll see the spawn town, you'll talk to people, they'll tell you where different things are, not because, we have defined these locations or we even have writing noting those locations, but because they have developed this virtual geospatial model that I speak of. And you can see it, you can see the results in real time, right? People, it is, it is a multiplicative effect on the plausibility and the immersive richness of social interaction. And then, of course, right, this map that I've been referring to is a work in progress. This is coming in our next update, so we're going to see how the geography that's been custom made impacts some of these social interactions and emergent behaviors. And then I guess I'll do a rewind after that. But thank you for listening.